Hello! I was trending on YouTube with a video that I made quite quickly. That honestly I think went fairly well. So did I get one thing wrong? Yes. Did I get two things wrong? Probably. But if I did, I don't know what the second thing is. But we're going to get to the thing that I got wrong. We're also going to look at a bunch of questions that I got asked, and we're going to talk through them. This person says, I'm so tired of videos like these. Obviously, this is not a pure direwolf. This is the beginning stages, and it has about 15% direwolf DNA in them with higher percentages to come. Pointless, useless video. That's not true. It doesn't have 15% direwolf DNA. It has 99.99999%. I don't know what it is, but DNA from gray wolves with 14 genes changed in 20 different places. So 20 total changes, 14 total genes. So we've changed, 14 of the 20,000. I'm guessing that they roughly probably have around the same number as us. So that's not 15% direwolf genes. It's ridiculous to say that these are direwolves, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, more as we get through other questions. But I don't think that it was a ridiculous, pointless video. I think that it was informative a number of ways. And one of the things that I really like about this conversation is it lets us talk in a deeper way about stuff we don't usually get to talk very deeply about, like ecology, like biology, like taxonomy. It's a window into lots of interesting conversations, and I'm glad that we're getting to have them, even if the reason is that I'm frustrated that this company is using language that they obviously should not use, and they did not bring a direwolf back, because that's not a direwolf. This person says, I think designer babies can be a good thing. Like, if a baby would have ended up having a horrible debilitating disease, fixing that would be good. Absolutely. That's not what we mean when we say designer baby. We're already doing designer babies, if you can believe that. We do it in a different way. We do two different things. One, we do what you're suggesting, where we put genes into people. I don't know that we've done any well, we have. Somebody has. We have so far, and it was not okay, and the guy got in a lot of trouble. We have so far not done any germline editing, where we take a baby and we put a new gene into that baby, and that baby is going to have that from embryo all the way forever. It's going to pass that gene on to their offspring. We haven't done that yet, except in a situation where these two babies in China, that situation where this guy, I think he went to jail even. Yes, he did. He did go to jail. He's no longer in jail, but he did go to jail. But we have done gene editing on people, but it doesn't get into their reproductive cells. So like if you want to cure somebody of sickle cell anemia, you would give them a bone marrow transplant with genetically modified bone marrow cells. So that you kill all the existing bone marrow in their bodies, and then you'd give them new genetically modified bone marrow, and that would recolonize their bones. This is amazing, right? And then that would become their new blood source, and the genetic modifications would eliminate the sickle cell, and this has happened. People have been cured of sickle cell, which is amazing. So we've done that. But the other thing that we have done is the way that we do designer babies now, kind of, where we let people select certain things about their children. So if you are doing IVF, so you're doing in vitro fertilization, you can look at a bunch of embryos and you could say, like, here are the embryos you have to choose from, and we can make sure, we can screen for diseases in those embryos, so in these like fertilized eggs, and then you could pick what you'd like to see. So not having a disease would be the number one thing that you'd like to pick. But then number two is like, maybe you want a boy, maybe you want a girl. People think that perhaps Elon Musk has done this because of his children. Many were conceived through IVF, and he has a very large, sort of unnaturally, surprisingly large proportion of boys to girls among his children. This is definitely something that is allowed and that people do. And beyond sex selection, which to me feels like, you've crossed the line, I don't know if there are other things that people pick, like if they've picked like blue eyes or blonde hair or whatever, which of course is creepy. But when we say designer babies, we do not mean genetically modifying a baby so that they will not have a disease. That is something that is being explored and mostly is being done in a selection process. So you have a number of embryos that you could choose from. You choose the one that does not have the abnormality that you might pass on to your baby. But it has not been done in the actual like changing the genome of the embryo, because you don't need to when it's something as simple as that. But when we talk about designer babies, what we usually mean is that you're selecting a bunch of traits that are not about disease. And there's a fuzzy line between those things. Like, at what point is something a disability? At what point is it a disease? At what point is it just like normal human life? That's tricky. There are a lot of risk factors. There's very few diseases that are actually like one gene is the problem. Okay, here's the thing that I got wrong. The 2021 paper does not say that jackals are more closely related to direwolves than gray wolves. It shows that jackals and gray wolves are equally related. They both branch off at the same place. This is the thing that I got wrong. And that is correct. Jackals are a more ancient lineage than gray wolves. So gray wolves have split off from other species since. So I misinterpreted that. I read it incorrectly and then I told it incorrectly. I'm going to try to edit it out of the original video. That is the case. So they are basically all equally distantly related from each other. Jackals and wolves and direwolves all equally distantly related from each other. So according to the 2021 paper, they have this ancestor that was a very long time ago. And that's ultimately the bigger point. Even if there were only two species, if it was just gray wolves and direwolves, they would still be 6 million years separated, according to the 2021 paper, since they shared a common ancestor, and that's just a very long time, which would indicate that there's a lot of space between them. And the colossal paper that they say that they're going to publish soon, and I hope is says all the things that they say, and we just learn more about this, indicates that what happened was that that branch happened, and then later there's the direwolf branch over here and the wolf branch over here, and then along that point, at some point, an ancestor of gray wolves, but not gray wolves, so 3 million years ago, an ancestor of gray wolves interbred with this one over here. And that would make them significantly more genetically similar. It would not make them as genetically similar as two species that branched off 3 million years ago, but it would make them more genetically similar than two species that branched off 6 million years ago. And that makes sense to me, honestly, having looked at both of the skeletons of these animals, that they would not be as far apart as gray wolves and jackals, because gray wolves and jackals have very different morphologies. But dogs are weird. Dogs have very flexible genetics, and so it makes, we can tell that because we've bred them and we see all the kinds of dogs we get. And so I don't know enough to say whether it would be weird for direwolves to convergently evolve into something that is so similar in morphology to a gray wolf. I just want to be clear. One, we understand extinction as a species much more deeply and robustly than we do as individuals. There is a lot of understanding of extinction that you do not get in school, and sort of the message of extinction is bad. Obviously extinction is bad, but it's not what you think it is. The stories that we tend to tell about extinction are we killed all the dodos because we wanted to eat them, but that's not most stories of extinction. Most stories of extinction are we moved into a habitat so much that habitat no longer existed, and then the species inside of that habitat, the most delicate of them, or the most specific to that ecosystem of them, stopped having a way to make a living on Earth. And so they went extinct. And that's the vast majority of animals that are in danger of going extinct are because of habitat loss, not because of poaching or disease or anything like that. Though poaching is a big part of it, especially for larger animals. This is the thought experiment that I obviously we cannot enact, but imagine, take all of these direwolf genes and you put them in me, and you're not going to make a direwolf. What you will have is a human who has different characteristics than I do, and probably not that different. Probably is a bigger me. Blinkshot just asked, jacket where from need? You might notice that I'm wearing the same clothes as I was yesterday. That is the case. That is what happened. I didn't record this right after the video. I recorded the next day, and I'm wearing the same shirt. And that is the lifestyle I live. But this jacket is from a company called Oxcart, I think. Yeah. Oxcart Assembly, and I got it because somebody who likes what I do messaged me on TikTok, and they're a prop master, and they had this jacket as a prop for a live stream that they helped produce, and they just sent it to me. Freaking cool. I'm very lucky. Gabby says, I love the We're Here newsletter. It's the best part of my week. You can sign up for the We're Here newsletter. If you watched that video and you thought about it, but then you didn't do it, now's the time to do it, right? You watch it and you said, I'm going to do that, but then you forgot. You just didn't follow through. There's a link in the description. Get a little bit of internet curated by a human person. Me and John Green and Peyton curating a little bit of the internet for you instead of it being curated by algorithms that are just trying to control you and keep you watching things. Add a little bit of that to your life. Doesn't that sound like a good thing to have, right? Yes. Okay. Sign up. It's free. Will says we're already doing ecosystem engineering with genetic modification, e.g. there is an effort to bring back the American chestnut tree, and they're looking into using gene editing to help save the iwi in Hawaii. I don't know about the iwi. Let's look up that. It's a bird. Oh my God, it's an amazing bird, and I love this bird, and I hope that it never goes extinct. The American chestnut is such a great example of when de-extinction actually makes sense. I don't know much about the EOE, but with the American chestnut, it isn't that its niche disappeared, it's that blight killed it. So it had a disease that it could not recover from, still cannot recover from. If you plant an American chestnut seed in the Southwest US, it will not survive because this disease is still in the soil. And so genetically modifying the American chestnut to be resistant to blight would allow it to re-enter the ecosystems where it no longer is, and where there is an existing niche for it, and where other organisms evolved in its presence. That ecosystem evolved to exist with American chestnut trees, and until very recently, like this isn't that. When did chestnut blight happen? It started around 1904. By the 1950s, most mature trees were dead. So this is very recent that this happened, and being able to bring back the American chestnut, which is not extinct because you could still get seeds and you can grow them, they just die. Doing genetic modification for them would allow them to re-enter and refill their niche. So the exact thing that we want from de-extinction. Because it's important to recognize, and this was like a top comment on the video, the reason most species go extinct, the reason for most extinctions, is that the niche no longer exists. So something happened that closed off the niche. And of course, this happens all the time, and that results in extinction and constant. But the reason it is hundreds of times the normal rate of background extinction right now is because a lot of human activity is closing down niches for these animals to exist. But you can't just bring back the animal and the niche arrives back along with it. You bring back the animal, you put it in the wild, and then it goes extinct again because the original problem that created the extinction still exists, which is that its space in the ecosystem no longer exists because the habitat has been fragmented or changed in such a way that it isn't there anymore. But with diseases, that's different. So if with Tasmanian devils, for example, their niche still exists, but they have this contagious cancer that is very dangerous for them. There's lots of examples like this where the problem could actually be solved, and then there would still be a place in that ecosystem for that organism. The other thing that you can do is you can say, we're doing all of this effort, and it's public and it's exciting and people get behind it in a way that they wouldn't. And I know that this isn't how it should be, but we exist in the world as it exists. If you bring back the Przewalski's horse, for example, is a good example. So these horses went extinct mostly because of their habitat was taken away. But as we bring them back, bring them back from the brink, we can say we've got these new horses, we're working really hard to create these horses, and there will be more public interest in creating the niche again, in allowing for there to be space for these horses, which doesn't just help the horses, it creates a whole area that's of solid habitat that otherwise would not be available, and everybody's sort of behind it. And I like that. Sometimes people will say, we're spending all this money on this one horse. Why don't we just do X, Y, or Z? And it's well, you have to exist inside of the world that we exist in. And if these efforts to spend a lot of money doing crazy things to try and bring back these animals get people sort of aligned and together that this is definitely a good, and it allows you to, along with it, create a large area of habitat that those organisms would then exist inside of. They can now, you've recreated the niche, then that's valuable. It's valuable to get people excited about stuff. And so some people are like, Hank, why aren't you more critical of this stuff? Because we're talking about it. We're talking about it, and we weren't talking about it before. So I'm glad, it's an interesting, useful topic, and we should be talking about it. And we're not ultimately, you don't save a bunch of animals by being hyper nerds and poo-pooing on everything. People got to be excited about stuff. So why are we spending money trying to bring back long dead species instead of protecting the ones we already have? I mean, wouldn't it be better to make sure our current species don't go extinct than to try to revive dead species? It would be much more cost efficient. There's an element of we focus on what excites us. We are still humans and we do not make rational decisions. There are limited resources and we do not deploy those resources in a rational way. So I guess sometimes people ask why don't we do the more efficient thing? And I'm well, never have we. So I don't expect us to, I guess. This is a good question. Why do you believe that there will be more habitat on Earth in 50 or 100 years? Because there will be fewer humans. We live we live in the most weird moment in human history, where we are about to, not through war or famine or disease, the population of places is about to start going down. And we will continue to become more advanced in our technology. So we will more efficiently use land, and there will be fewer humans to use it. And my guess is that will result in a lot of land that was formerly devoted to agriculture will not be devoted to that anymore. It will become available. This was going to be a huge problem for a lot of people who depend on agriculture for their living, and for whom this is like a great deal of value. And we're going to have to figure out how to reconvert that land into something valuable for the climate, for biodiversity, and also for the people who use that land. But I do think that in 100 years from now, we will be wrestling with that. Probably 50 years from now, we'll start wrestling with it. 100 years will be solidly wrestling with it, and a lot of that land will be becoming more wild again. That's how I feel. I don't know if that's for sure true, but like the human population does look like it's going to go down, and we are still getting better at using land efficiently. So I don't see any other thing that might happen. Sometimes I see a chimpanzee skeleton. I like interpreting this as if he sometimes just stumbles across chimp skeletons. I did recently, actually, but for a good reason. I was in the Natural History Museum in London, and there was a chimpanzee skeleton. I was like, dang, that looks like a little person. That sure does look like a person shape. It was like a baby chimp. Sometimes you do, if you live the right kind of life. So we're playing God now, says Caleb. Caleb, I have news. We've been playing God for a while. And Jeremy, it's funny, if I had 10 cents for every time I heard the dinosaurs went extinct, I'd have more money than Musk. Yet I've also heard, probably just as many times, that dinosaurs evolved into birds. Both of those sentences are true in their own special way. Taxonomy continues to be messy, but obviously there were many non-avian dinosaurs who did go extinct. So there's the avians, who are descended from dinosaurs, and taxonomically we consider that to be whatever they are descended from is what they are. So they're like inside of the group of dinosaurs, just like we are inside of the group of mammals. Dinosaurs is just a bigger category than you think it is. Like your head says dinosaur is a category that it is like about T-Rexes and Brontosauruses. But obviously birds are only a subsection of the dinosaurs. And there were many non-avian dinosaurs, so dinosaurs that did not fly, that went extinct. The only dinosaurs left after the mass extinction event were flying dinosaurs. So birds, avian dinosaurs. They like all of these different branches of the tree, only one of them made it out. So birds are not descended from T-Rexes. Birds are not descended from Diplodocus. Birds are descended from a branch of dinosaurs that headed off into the flying direction, and they became the avian dinosaurs, and they are the only dinosaurs that we have left. That is the situation. So dinosaurs did go extinct. Almost all of them. Sometimes I will hear people say they didn't go extinct, they evolved into birds. That is not what happened. Most of them went extinct. Some of them, before the extinction, had already evolved into birds, and those ones continue to exist. Venus Ingenious asks, I'm a little confused. So these are not direwolves, but this is a type of gray wolf, or is this a separate species that has been created? Yeah, no, it's confusing. Like, you're confused because we don't have words for this stuff. If you ask me, this is a gray wolf. It's just a gray wolf. It can, if you allowed it to, it would breed with a gray wolf and have fertile gray wolf offspring. The only thing preventing that is humans physically separating them from gray wolves. Otherwise, I'm sure that they would interbreed. Follow my logic here. Starting out, they say that they've made a direwolf, which is definitely a separate species from gray wolf. I say they definitely didn't make a direwolf. It's almost entirely the DNA of a gray wolf with only 14 modified genes. And several of those not even modified with original direwolf genome stuff, but instead modified with stuff that just gave them the look that they wanted. So that's definitely not a direwolf. But if they're making the case that it's a direwolf, then that would mean that it is at least a different species. That if it's a different species, then it is a manufactured species. It's a synthetic species that has not existed before, that was created by people. But that's only accepting their premise that it's a different species at all. I just don't think it is a different species. I think that they created a designer gray wolf. They, like the way that you might make a designer baby, they made a designer gray wolf. And that's my opinion. And I don't know how one would argue against it, but we do have a comment from the people at Colossal who are going to argue against it, and I'm going to listen to them and tell them what I think about their argument. Colossal edited 15 extinct direwolf variants into the donor gray wolf genome, creating more direwolves that express genes that have not been expressed for more than 10,000 years. I'll give you that. You are expressing genes that have not been expressed for 10,000 years. That is right. We refer to these animals as direwolves because they embody the key morphological traits, behavioral characteristics, and ecological functions that defined the species. Look at us. We're having a conversation, you and me, and I can say to you that that's really silly. That doesn't make any sense. I can give you that there are direwolf genes inside of these wolves, but admit you could also put those exact direwolf genes into me, and I would be a human being. I would still be a human. We don't think this way, but you can put a bunny rabbit gene into a person and it will express and it will affect that person, but they will not become a bunny rabbit. They will still be a person. And in the same way, you could put like that gene that made their bodies bigger into a human, and the human body would be bigger. So do they have the key morphological traits that make them into direwolves? I don't think so, but additionally, that's not how we define what a species is. We might resort to that if we don't have genetic information, but in this case we do, and we know that these are genetically gray wolves. So do they have some key morphological characteristics that make them in the direwolves? That's not how species work. If you had a direwolf and you bred it with this wolf, the offspring would be half direwolf, half gray wolf. But you go on to also list ecological functions and behavioral characteristics. And I just have to say it's weird to say that because we have no idea what the behavioral characteristics of direwolves would be like. We don't know what they were like. And not only that, but like with a species that is somewhat cultural, like a direwolf would be, we will never know what they would be like. And even if we had a 100% clone of a direwolf with 100% direwolf DNA, we still wouldn't know what the behavioral characteristics of a direwolf would be because a lot of that information would be passed down by the pack to the pups. And in the same way, do they serve an ecological function? Like, would they serve that ecological function if they were released into the Pleistocene? Probably not. But we know that they can't serve it here because the environment that they evolved to be inside of no longer exists. So they cannot serve the ecological function that they evolved for because it does not exist, because the Pleistocene ended, along with a significant mass extinction in large animals, including direwolves. They look like direwolves. I don't know if that's true, and neither do you. They would function like direwolves in an ecosystem. I don't know if that's true, and neither do you. And they express genes specific to direwolves. That is true. But there is a genetically modified tomato that contains genes from flounders, and they're not fish. They're tomatoes. So, and we're like on the same page about that. Steve Mo says, who cares, bro? It's still cool. And I don't want you to think that I don't think this is cool. I do think that we have an overly simplistic view of extinction that we're kind of stuck with from third grade, and that this is a good opportunity to look that understanding of extinction in the face and be aware that it is not what we imagine it to be. It is in many ways the destruction of a space in the natural environment for a species. It's not just the destruction of the species. And sometimes it is. Sometimes we go and we shoot all the passenger pigeons, or we kill all the dodos, or the American chestnut gets blight. So in some cases, that is what happens. But in most cases of extinction, what happened is not that all of these animals got killed, and if we could only bring them back, they would thrive. Mostly it is that we destroyed the world that they evolved to live inside of, and so they can no longer live inside of the world as it currently exists. You know, like everybody at Colossal knows this. This is not news to them. But you cannot fix the biodiversity crisis by bringing back animals. You have to fix the biodiversity crisis by stopping the destruction of the spaces that animals exist inside of, the habitats where they belong and that they evolved to thrive in. And sometimes natural changes end a species, and extinction is natural. We are experiencing an unnatural rate of it. It is not because we can't bring back species. There are some species that is true for. The American chestnut is a good example. If we could figure out a chestnut tree that was immune from blight, they would repopulate their niche, and the American forests would be healthier for it. The Yangtze River dolphin, if we brought that back, it would just exist inside of zoos, and maybe we could use that as a lever to pull to convince people that we need to protect that environment that they evolved to be inside of. But it would be very difficult because that would have a lot of costs. There's a huge number of costs that would be associated with that. And there's a reason why they went extinct. Like we did that not because like we happened to hit too many with boats, but because their entire environment has changed so substantially that there was no niche left for the Yangtze River dolphin to exist inside of. So we would have to change a great deal in order to recreate that niche. And if we could de-extinct it, which I want us to do, and at the same time use that de-extinction as a lever to pull on to counter public opinion and to leverage money to be spent, not just to make a space available for the Yangtze River dolphin, but to make that entire habitat less encroached on by humans, more open to all of the species that exist inside of that ecosystem, that would be a net good. And maybe that is a role that de-extinction can play. Not just a bringing back a species, but saying, also, if you think that it's cool to dedicate all these resources to de-extincting this animal, then you also have to think that it's cool to protect the niche that it formerly thrived inside of, and then that niche no longer existed because that ecosystem was so degraded. So we have to bring back that ecosystem in order to fit this animal that we are also bringing back. I think that to me is the best argument in favor of de-extinction. Not that we bring back an animal, but that we use this sort of psychological hook of bringing back the animal to also convince people that we need to protect the habitat. Dumb question. I'm sure that it's not. But you say that they, the direwolves, what they ate is not here anymore. Can't they just eat the animals that are here today? Yeah, absolutely. Like if you got rid of all the gray wolves and you replaced them with very large gray wolves with big jaws and muscular shoulders, they probably could survive in Yellowstone National Park, right? What I'm saying is that the ecosystem they specifically evolved to thrive in, the Pleistocene ecosystem that had like giant ground sloths and mammoths and all of this stuff that doesn't exist anymore. Let's look at a list of Pleistocene big mammals. Horses, interestingly, so horses died out in the Americas during the Pleistocene, but they continued living elsewhere. Horses evolved in America, but then all the horses that are in America now are imported from Eurasia. So we did during the Pleistocene have horses, but they died out during this mass extinction. Ground sloths, dwarf pronghorn, ancient bison, and camels. If you can believe that. We also had camels. Also peccaries, which I think are like little pigs. What's a peccary? Is that like it's a pig thing. I didn't even know about that. American savanna of the Pleistocene fucking kicks ass. And I do understand why people want to like go to a park that I would go. For clarity, if they created a Pleistocene park that had ancient bison and mammoths and ground sloths and I'd go. I'd pay big bucks. Absolutely. I want to be clear. I agree that this is very cool. It's just not like the direwolf in particular is not a direwolf, but I like cool. I love to see wolves in any circumstance, and like show me an extra big one. Okay. But the point is that the direwolves evolved for an ecosystem that doesn't exist anymore. There was a very different ecosystem before the Pleistocene mass extinction event in the Americas, and they would have preyed on a lot of animals that are no longer around. And that's probably why they went extinct, because those prey items went extinct. And why did those prey items go extinct? It might have been climate, might have been humans, might have been a combination. Unironically, does anyone know if what he says at 1650 about using blood to clone pets would apply to felines as well as dogs? I've always thought about trying to clone my kitty when she goes, and if it's something that a blood draw could help happen, that could be done. That's actually insane. Yeah, no, this would also work. I think that every mammal has these kinds of cells that could then be used to create a clonal cell colony. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that would also work for cats. It's interesting. I feel like we clone dogs more than cats because like as a cat person, I feel like we underestimate the extent to which cats love you and are very social. Like that's just not the story that we tell about them. And they're differently social from dogs for sure. But like I have had several cats and they are all very different from each other. And one final question that I did get a lot is, are they still good boys? And the answer to that question is yes. These are good boys. And also there's a female that was born and she's a good girl. And these are good puppies. They're good puppies. I hope that they live wonderful lives and we get to be huge and are appreciated by the world. And I want to appreciate them from the angle of like giving us an excuse to talk about all of this cool stuff. But I do think that it is weird to call them direwolves. And maybe we're intentionally courted in controversy. Maybe you, like both Colossal and I, are benefiting from the courted controversy of them deciding to go headfirst into calling these things direwolves. Which I ultimately understand. I'm a little bit perplexed by the extent to which some in the mainstream press just went with it. Is it a distraction from the real work that has to be done? Sure, but so isn't everything. And ultimately, when I finish work today, I'm going to watch like streamers playing a video game about selling drugs. So like, we're all doing our thing, we're all doing our thing. If you want to get a little bit of filtered, human curated cool stuff in your inbox every week, sign up for the We're Here newsletter. It's linked in the description. And that's the end of the video.